It's time for good energy, and I'm Dr. Julie, and today we are on Bodyful Day 87. We are looking at sight, adaptation in sight, movie theaters, TV, and more. All right, there are no props for today, so let's just start with our usual. Looks like my sticker is going to come off. So take a deep breath in and release. Breathe out at the belly, breathe up into the chest, breathe out of the sinuses, and feel that sacrum shift. Take a deep breath in. And release. Think about any garbage from today. I sat with my iPad balanced on my knees for a while. Could definitely feel it on the inside of my knees. Take a deep breath in. And release. All right. Today we're talking about the adaptation in vision. This whole week we're talking about adaptation and how sometimes it's a good thing and sometimes it's not so good. We started out with taste. We went to hearing. Let's see, that was Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, touch. And now we are on sight. And in sight, I led with the idea of movies, movie theaters, TV, and more. All right, so the reason why we talk about movie theaters is that movie theaters provide a pretty cool experience of adaptation. Initially, when you walk into a movie theater, even if it's still just the previews and everything, it's a little bit darker in there. And when you walk out after you leave the movie, it's totally fine. But if you get in late after the previews have kind of almost wrapped up and they're ready to show the movie, when you walk in, the initial all darkness makes it really hard to see anything. And that is because your eye receptors are trying to adapt to the lack of light. They've already been kind of overused with light, so they can't detect the lack of light. And the interesting thing is that ties into a pattern recognition thing we're going to talk about in a little bit later. So we can do it, but the interesting thing about movie theaters is that light-dark adaptation, which is what that is, when you walk in and the movie theater is dark and you can't see your seat, that's dark adaptation. And then when you leave the movie theater and it's a bright, shiny day out because you've been in there during the afternoon, like it was really hot and you just didn't want to do anything else, so you took in a movie. When you step back out of the movie theater again, then you run into light adaptation because you run out and there's so much bright light. The receptors for light end up being completely bleached out within the first few seconds of you stepping outside. And then you have to adapt to the brightness. And so you can get that experience like being outside during a really bright day, and then you walk inside and all of a sudden your house is just like a cave because you can't see as much because you have to light adapt. Vice versa, coming from inside your house and then going outside on a bright sunny day, you get the same experience. Now, the other cool thing about the negative side of adaptation is that just like touch, where we adapt to a negative irritation, we do the same thing with vision. And so looking at your device all day long, looking at your computer all day long, looking at your iPads all day long, because they're giving out constant blue light, it's actually a stressor on your nervous system. But you don't realize it because your visual field adapts to that extra blue light. And it's not until you get done and you turn it off and you're like, I got that headache right here, or, something just doesn't feel right. So sometimes adaptation is negative because we don't know the irritant, just like the blister on the back of your heel. The irritant is there until it's gone and then you're like, So visual adaptation is interesting at the receptor level. It's also interesting at the pattern level. So we frequently will watch something and have the same pattern and see the same pattern of behavior over and over again, and we adapt to it. And so when it's not there, we don't notice it. So this is kind of the case of going to the council meeting, and Fred always sits to your right, or two people to your right. You just know that he always sits there. And you just assume that he was there last time, because maybe he just doesn't talk much, but that's just the pattern. That's how everybody sits. And what you didn't know is that there was an absence of that pattern. Because we're so used to the pattern, we're actually cognitively filling in the fact that people are there when they're not, or that objects are there when they're not. And so, again, adaptation leads to us adapting to a pattern and making it reality even when it isn't. And this is kind of the reason why Plato and Socrates and Aristotle were like, your senses are wrong. You need to use your head and not your body. But it's not really that. Your senses are right a lot of the time, but you got to get out of the extra stuff that's in here so that you can actually really perceive what you're sensing. All right, so my last thing today about vision and visual adaptation comes, we're moving sort of bigger and bigger and bigger. It comes to adapting to what we see and the concept of normalizing. So the reason why I put TV in there is because we normalize what we see each time we see it. And it's actually more movies, but it is kind of TV, that the ratings for television shows have changed as we've allowed more things into our television and allowed more things into our visual field. A little more swearing, a little more violence, a little more skin. And so ratings have adapted because we have normalized, or we have seen the pattern. We have adapted to a pattern and went, oh, well, somebody saying shit really isn't bad, but 30 years ago, somebody saying shit on television was pretty not good. And so we normalize things, and sometimes we normalize them like the irritation, like the skin irritation, like staring at your screen irritation. We normalize them in the wrong way. So we normalize a behavior that really shouldn't be normalized, or we don't normalize behaviors that should. Swearing, that's hearing, but we also might see things, see violence, and we normalize it and say, well, it's not in this video game, but it's okay because it's on a computer. Again, that's a fine line. You got to figure out where you stand, but the presence of it and the fact that it is more pervasive is normalizing it visually in what we see. Other ways it can be not good. So we think about normalizing breastfeeding. Breastfeeding has always had a hard time being normalized. In first world countries, it's not something we should have done back in the 50s, because you don't nurse your child out in the middle of nowhere. You give them a bottle because you should be doing other things than breastfeeding your child. But actually, if we saw more mothers breastfeeding their children, then it would be a normal visual pattern that we would see, and it would be okay. So adaptation can be at the neural level, it can be at the pattern level, and it can be at the concept level. And that's just adaptation of the visual field. So pay attention to what you consider normal, what you have adapted to versus what you would have adapted to 20 years ago. How does that play up? Is it a good thing? Was the normalization good? Or is it not so good? I'm not going to stand on either side. Well, I do stand on certain sides, but everybody has their own opinion because of what they believe normalizing does. And that's the same thing with adapting. All right. Deep, not so deep. We'll walk the line. We got some more adaptation coming up. So let's finish off with our breaths. Take a deep breath in, And release. Have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow.